not with the actual observations in the interviews, we ended up with a complete picture, and that particular provider was in my opinion, he was a superstar, other than the fact that he wasn't signing his notes on time. He was completing the notes almost all the way to the end, and he had probably about 1 or 2 minutes left to actually just sign the note, but then he didn't do it. And I'll go over that data when we get to some examples. So today I was planning on doing walking through some of the workflow analysis reports for this data. I was going to walk through a report. I'm going to show the tool interfaces that we have, because we have 2 tools that we use, and then briefly show you how we analyze a piece of that in Excel, and then discuss what we do with the data. Initially I was going to do the report walkthrough and then show you the tool interface, but I've decided to flip those because I think that will help with the discussion later. So I'm going to show you the tool interface first and then walk through the report. So our first tool that we have, let me okay, we call this the appointment analysis tool, or RVU data cruncher. Sometimes it's been called that for a while because we used to use it just for RVUs. So this was made in Microsoft Access, and the process is very simple. All we do is go into CHCS, and we run a CHCS ad hoc, and we simply change, and let me see if I can blow this up a little bit here so you can see the actual font. So we run this ad hoc in CHCS. All we have to do is enter the MIPRS code, the start date and the end date, and then we enter this, whatever file we want to call it. You just copy this whole thing and you paste it into CHCS, and then you're done, and that is your report. It takes probably about maybe 15 to 20 seconds in CHCS. At that point you have your data available, and you just have to transfer the data over to your computer. Once you transfer it over to your computer, and you simply rename it and put it in a folder, and the instructions are all right here in the database, how to rename it. You just click on one button and it brings the data over and processes it. It strips all the dates apart, breaks it up by hours and minutes, day of the week, and all of that, and it puts it into, it combines it all together into one big table, and it's broken out by provider, the appointment date, time. There's all kinds of, it's just broken out into all kinds of different pieces. Appointment type, appointment status. You've got appointment month, day, year, so if you wanted to analyze the longer stretches of time, the appointment hour, the minute, check-in date, check-in time, and then you can see here that there's a sign date and sign time. Those aren't in CHCS, and so that's the only manual part that we have to do for this process. So in order to enter the sign date and sign times, you just pull this up, and this is also part of the tool, and you can filter on a particular clinic. So here, if I wanted to filter on, let's say one of these teams here, and I just saw my flicker, so I'm hoping, okay, yeah, you're still seeing me, okay. So you can set up a filter, and maybe you wanted to look at a particular provider, so I can pick like one provider here, and I can go into Alta now, and that's probably not a good example because there's only one of them. I can go into Alta now, and I just manually go in and I enter the sign date and the sign time out of Alta. We tried some automated processes out of CHCS, but the time differences were too great, and there was a lot of variation in the data, so we couldn't use any automated data that was available to us out of CHCS. So once you enter these sign dates and sign times, then you can start processing the data. And we've figured out it takes about an hour to go through 100 signature times in Alta. So if you have and we try to do a wide variety throughout a week, try to get 4 or 5 per provider per day for 1 or 2 weeks. And then that gives us some data that we can analyze. What are their signature habits? So then once you're done with that, we just export the data. And at that point, you're done with the database. And then you open up your the actual exported data, which ends up looking like this. And over here, you notice I don't have any sign dates or sign times, but here's an example of one that I did enter. So it calculates how many minutes and hours from their so this is how many minutes and how many hours right here, from the time that the patient checked in to the time that the provider signed it. And this is the category it falls into. 24 to 72 hours is the category, which is within standards, but we would like to get them within 24 hours just for so it's fresh in their minds. So that's how that data is broken apart. One of the other pieces of data, though, that's really useful is the check-in times. And I don't know how many. Let's see here. Can I? Oh, you're asking me if I can go to full screen. Does that help? Okay. Well, I can't. Okay. So one of the things that we can do really quick at this point is to analyze the different check-in times and what category they fall into, because a lot of clinics will provide they'll blame the appointment being late on the patient. And so what we've done in this is you can analyze the check-in time categories. And so here's just for this particular clinic, you can look at how early are the patients checking in, and we just do a simple pivot table, and then we throw that into a pie chart. And so for this clinic, you can see that the staff and the providers were blaming the clinic being late on the patients showing up late. But you can see from this that the majority of the patients are showing up early, and that's what the green part of the pie represents. So is there, I'm getting a few messages. Are you not able to see my screen? Okay, I think there is a, because somebody was asking me to go full screen, I think there's an option each individual person can go, you can toggle your own full screen mode. So if on the bottom of your screen you click the full screen button, you'll be able to see my screen better, if that's helpful. Okay.
Ryan, do you also have a full screen button on your computer that you can push?
I do have a full screen button, but I'm showing just a spreadsheet right now on one of my screens, so I don't think my full screen button will help. It's set up right now so each person can control their own full screen mode, and I'm just sharing one of my screens.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, if you click on that full screen mode, it'll get rid of all of the little pods on the left and right and bottom, and it'll blow up to just what I have on my screen. So hopefully that helps. And each person has their own controls. Okay, so so here anyway, going back to what I was talking about, this pie chart represents the patients showing up early versus showing up late. So you can see that a very small number of them are actually showing up late, and these ones that are showing up late 0 to 5 minutes are probably they might be just walking in the door, or they might even be waiting in line. So in reality, you have a fairly small percentage, but it's significant enough that it could cause a problem. So so that's one of the things that we can use this data for, is very quickly show them some of this information. We can also look at, in some instances they've asked us to look at how many left without being seens do I have, how many keps versus cancels versus no-shows. So we have all of this data available as well. So that's very easy to analyze in a very short period of time, just using Excel with some pivot tables. Okay, so one of the other things that I wanted to show you, let's see here. Okay. So when we're all done analyzing the data, this is what one of our reports might look like. We can, right now, you didn't see any RVUs in the report that I had. That's we get RVUs from another report, but I'm hoping by the end of this week we'll be able to pull RVU data over from CHCS. We'll be able to pull all the codes over, and that will also be part of the database and this report. So that will be, and part of the reason why I'm showing this is I'm trying to set this up so any MTF can use it. And we've actually used it at 3 other MTFs other than Madigan, and it's worked fine. And they were able to get to this same data. So, okay. So this is an example of one of the reports that we have. So, and this is broken out. This first part is just the RVU portion of the report. And we have it broken out by clinic, and then you can see this blank area. These are actually broken out by providers, but I deleted the providers out of here just so I didn't have them on the DCO. Now here we had, for just a quality check, we have a max RVU, and we actually found that 2 providers during this period of time had a max RVU for 1 visit of 155 RVUs, which is, you're never going to see that. So something was wrong with a visit or 2. So we were able to go in and actually find the specific appointment that had that problem. And what they ended up doing was they entered the code, this 90471, for an immunization. And I believe, based on the next code that they entered, this 906, they entered a unit of service of 906. So this poor kid got 906 immunizations on one day, and then this kid got 904 immunizations on one day. That's not going to happen. So we told them about that and asked them to have their coder go in and fix those 2 appointments. This messed up the RVU count though, so we had to take that into account when we did our before and our after. We couldn't just take the raw RVUs. We used this knowledge to adjust the RVUs for the after. So when we went back into the clinic and did an after analysis, after maps, we remembered that these 2 providers had RVUs that were messed up. So we were able to drop that average down before, and then we actually showed, I believe these actually had an increase, whereas if we would have left these 2 RVUs counts in there, it actually showed that they decreased after a MAPS rollout. Okay, so these are just graphical representations. Again, I erased the provider names out of here, but these stack on top of each other. So here you have the total RVU, your average RVU. Now you can see here that this particular provider on this one had a really high average but a really low total, and that's because they only had, then we count the number of events that generated these RVUs, they only had like 4 or 5 events that actually generated RVUs, so their average is really high. So again, you can't go with just one piece of data. We were analyzing all 3 to complete the picture. One of the other things that we do too, and we don't use a graph anymore, this is from February, so we actually use what we call the heat chart. But this shows the appointment frequency in particular clinics, so you can see what days of the week they have the heaviest number of appointments. So for this clinic, Wednesday was really high, Thursday was pretty high, and then they have different spikes at different times of day. Monday's pretty light, and Friday's pretty light. So if they're able to, they could maybe adjust these Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays and try to slide them into Monday and Friday if they're capable of doing that. And then they asked us to do some other analysis specific to active duty. So we're able to take very detailed information and manipulate it however we want, because we're dealing with the raw data and not a roll-up by MTF or a roll-up by clinic. We're getting each individual appointment. Okay, so going into these signature times. So we spent all that time entering the signature times, 100 an hour. It takes us about maybe 5 hours to get this amount of data. we can now lay this out. So this is your provider. You got your day of the week, and then this is the hour of the day. So 6 o'clock. No, sorry, I got that wrong. Morning. Here's your hour of the day. 6, 7, 8, 9. So these are your hours. Okay, and then these are your totals for that column. The peach color here is the times that they probably shouldn't be signing notes, because if they're signing notes, it means they're working, and that's one of the complaints that the providers have. I'm working after hours. With this provider here was signing notes on a Sunday and signing notes on a Saturday, so that means that they're working after hours, and they're also signing notes at 7, 8, 9 at night. So if we take this information and we provide it to the trainers, and we talk to the chiefs of the clinic about it, and we talk to the providers about it, and we talk to them about their habits. That way we know what their habits are before, and we see if we can change it. And sometimes we can't, because that's just the way that they like to do their work. Here's another provider, and you can see that this provider almost signs everything at night. If you look during the day, there's almost nothing signed during the day. Almost every single note was signed at night. That's not a very good habit to be in either, but that's what they were doing. And then this provider, again, doing the same thing, signing everything at night. So this data really provides a lot of good information about the provider's habits, and you can't necessarily get that from an interview or an observation, because you're not going to actually see them at their house signing these notes. Then we take the category of when they're signing. So this is the less than 24, between 24 and 72, and then greater than 72. Greater than 72 is outside the standard. So you can see that this provider had a lot of red. And this was that provider that I was talking to you about, where when you observe them, they look like a superstar. When you look at the data, they look completely the opposite. And it was just a matter of a few minutes if we were able to get him to sign that note before the end of his encounter. He would actually be one of the stellar performers, and he was very close to doing that. And then this is taking that same data, we just take the average signature time. So you can see again that one provider who had all the red, his average signature time was over 100 hours for each of his notes. And then this is another blow up of the this is another clinic, check-in versus appointment time. And so you can see that most of the time they're showing up early, and then that's the pie chart of showing up early, showing up just a little bit late, or showing up past the appointment time. Now we have one other piece of data that we use that I don't have available in the CHCS ad hoc yet, but it's looking at the frequency of ER visits by PCM. And so you can see what days of the week and what times of the day patients are showing up in the ER. We've also done some analysis with that compared to the unavailable appointment requests to see did they try to get into the clinic before they showed up at the ER, and we have some very interesting results from that. But that's a whole other set of data that that's not quite available yet for everybody else to use. And then we take that ER data and we look at, are there frequent flyers into the ER for this particular PCM? Are there people that are showing up in the ER multiple times? So I took 6 months worth of data, and this is on the bottom here, it shows the number of times a patient showed up at the ER for a specific patient, and these are the number of patients that were doing that. So we had roughly 65 patients show up 3 times, all the way up to 3 patients use the ER 11 times in a 6-month period. So we were able to provide that information to the clinics and show them specific names, and then they were able to contact the clinic, or they were able to contact the patient and try to manage issues that they had. One of them had a heart condition. And then down here is the detailed coding information broken out by clinic and then by providers. So this is your coding practices. And if we get into the providers, you can see, so here's a provider. I deleted their names up, but I color coded them, I alternated the colors. So these are the codes that this provider used and how often they used it. So 99214 they used 115 times, 99213 they used 88 times during this period of time. And so that's broken out for each provider. Again, we can give this to the trainers, and then the trainers can look at the coding habits. We can also give it to the coders, and the coders can say, hey, you're missing out on some RVUs, or you're possibly coding this wrong. And so they can help with the coding. So, and we do bring the coders into our MAPS rollouts, and we have them give an hour of their time to each provider. They give an hour training session, so they can use this data to help provide that training to the providers. So that is one set of reports that we use. Now there's one other tool. Let me see here. There's one other tool that we have that we use for actual observations, and this one is set up to use on a tablet. So and it's meant specifically for CWAs to use. And you just take your tablet, you put it in tablet mode, and if you click this button here, Open Forms, it opens up 3 sets of forms, and you can actually use your stylus to do your observations. And all this does is it very quickly you can observe 3 or more people doing multiple tasks. It works great for watching a front desk where they're receiving phone calls, they're checking patients in, they're filing paperwork, they're doing anything like that, talking to providers. So very quickly I can do timestamps down to the second just by clicking a few buttons with my stylus. I don't even have to type anything if I don't want to. So if I pick a particular, so for this column maybe I'm watching this MSA, this column I'm watching another MSA, and then this column I'm watching another MSA. So now I have all 3 of my MSAs set up, and I just start clicking. They get a phone call, they call received, and they're interacting with, so you listen for a little bit, oh, they're talking to the patient, what are they doing, they're booking an appointment, and then do they have people waiting? You could say that they have 2 people waiting to actually do something at the front desk, and then when that call is done I can just click this end stamp. Or maybe they're doing something else and they receive another phone call. I can actually start another record, and I can quickly toggle back and forth and get these timestamps very easily. And then from there I can graph all of this information out. And that's where it gets very useful, is when we start graphing it. So let's see here. Okay, and so I'm going to go over what we do with that observation data in this next part here. So what do we do with all this data? We use it to make informed decisions. It also helps give us credibility, because if we walk into a clinic and we say that we have recommended changes, or I'm here to help you, or we're workflow analysts, they sometimes don't. I've actually had them ask, what gives you the skills to do this, or why are you able to do this and we're not? And so this is one of those things that we can do for the clinics. They're not willing to sit down and analyze this data. They're not willing to sit down and observe their own MSAs and do that sort of thing and collect this data. So we can provide this for them, and it really helps them out, and it helps us make informed decisions. It also drives the training and the workflow. So here's an example going back to the patient check-in time. So this is how we can use this data. On the left side is a clinic that says this clinic is blaming the patients for the clinic running late. So they're saying all their patients are showing up late, and so what they've done is they've actually, let's say there's an 8 o'clock appointment, the patient shows up, they don't bring the patient back intentionally until 8:20, so the nurse doesn't get them until 8:20. And then, so that you just automatically shifted your entire schedule back 20 minutes, and then so then the patient's with, or the provider, the nurse is with the patient, and then the provider doesn't see that patient until probably about 8:40. So when we found this out when we were doing our interviews. So it goes, so here's our interview process. Nurse says, Yes, we shift our schedule because all the patients show up late. And then we talked to the patients in the lobby, and we didn't even ask them about this particular issue. The patient voluntarily said, I don't show up on time anymore because the clinic is always running late. And then we analyzed the data. The data shows that most of the patients are showing up early, but there's a fairly sizable chunk that do show up late. It's not significant, but it's a big chunk. So then what I did, and just to show you how easy and fast this was, this morning while we were having some audio problems, there was probably about a 10-minute block of time. I was able to pull data for another clinic that I knew encouraged their patients to show up early and actually brought them in early. I processed the data through the database, I analyzed it, and made this pie chart in 10 minutes over on the right side. So here we've got on the right side is a clinic that says, please show up early, and if the patient shows up late, they almost give them a hard time. And you can see the difference in the red. The patients in that clinic are showing up early, and the ones that are showing up early are showing up even earlier than the 0 to 5 minutes early. So it's a big chunk of patients showing up really early because they get in early. So if they show up 5 minutes early and the nurse is ready for them, they get them in 5 minutes early. They don't make them wait till 20 minutes after their appointment time. So and we haven't done this yet with the clinic, with this particular clinic, but I'm planning on taking this information back to the clinic and saying, hey, your guidelines in your clinic are actually causing your patients to show up later. Here's a clinic that is encouraging their patients to show up early, and they get them in early, and you can see that the whole clinic as a result is going to start running on schedule instead of always being late. And then the patients will show up early, as demonstrated in this pie chart. For the observations, I was asked to go into an example of using the observations that where I was actually clicking on times and doing my my workflow analysis and my observations with that tool. A clinic asked me to go in and observe their MSAs because they were considering adding the in the checkout process. They wanted to have them book their next set of appointments. So I observed their MSAs to see how that would impact their overall process. So this particular MSA, you can see booking appointments takes up this person's about 29% of this person's time. They actually do a lot of check-ins. They're doing the check-in process itself only takes about maybe 10-15 seconds per check-in, even though they're doing a lot of them. The booking process takes a long time. So as a result of that, if they want the patients to book appointments as they're leaving, they need to make sure that it doesn't impact checking in patients. So there was 3 MSAs. The second MSA, booking appointments, was taking 66% of their time because it was just complicated. They were booking, 4 or 5 appointments in advance, and then they had to hunt around. So 66% of their time was appointment booking. So if they were asked to book even more appointments as the patients were leaving, that might have a significant impact on the other activities this MSA was doing, like checking in. So as I was observing this, I noticed that there was another MSA from a related clinic, and they were doing a lot of paperwork, and I didn't quite understand what was going on with that. So I decided to observe that to see how much time was that paperwork management taking. It was taking 54% of their time to file convenience files for the clinic. And when I looked into this further, the convenience files, all those were, they were printouts from Alta. At the end of the visit, the provider would print out their note, send it to the front desk, and then this MSA would spend over half of their day filing that paperwork. So if they eliminated that, when they were just Alta notes, if they eliminated that process, that would relieve 54% of this MSA's time, and then they would be able to help out with booking appointments for the people just right behind them. So I basically went back and I advised them that they should change this process and try to get rid of these convenience files. And then I found out that 2 other subclinics under their umbrella were doing the same thing. So there was 3 MSAs that were impacted by the same process. So essentially, you're wasting 1.5 MSA's time as part of this paperwork filing process, and it took up a huge amount of space because they had a massive amount of filing cabinets that were needed to maintain those files. So if they were able to do that, that would make a big difference. Okay, one of the other things that came up as a workflow issue was the cast room was saying that their waiting room for their cast room was overflowing, and they wanted to bust out a wall to accommodate more patients waiting in the waiting room. So what I did then is, but every time I walked by, I noticed that there were hardly any patients in the cast room, and there weren't ever anybody in the waiting room. I just happened to be missing the specific day that all of the patients showed up. And if you look at this heat chart, basically what I did is I pulled the data and I analyzed it by day of the week and hour of the day, and then I looked at how many patients were actually showing up at those specific times. And you can see immediately that Monday morning at around 7:30 or 8 o'clock they had all their patients showing up all at that same time, and then they had another batch show up Friday afternoons roughly. But that Monday morning, that was that time when they see all the patients waiting to get into the cast room. And it had to do with the way they did their surgeries and the way so they did their surgeries the week before, they put the patients in a splint, and then the patient would show up the following Monday to get an actual cast on. So I asked if they could change their process a little bit, spread that out even over the rest of the Monday, spread it out a little bit, try to and the patients are waiting while this all is going on, so it definitely was not patient-centered when you were looking at this process. So I used the observations, I used this data, and I used the interviews that I did to drive that recommendation of spreading their times out a little bit. I don't know if they actually did it, but because they never actually got back to me. But when I did go back through, and I did notice that the waiting room later on was not as full, so I think they did start spreading those cast room appointments out. And then this is just a graphical representation of the same thing that you saw on the previous screen. So you can see on Monday at 8 o'clock you have this huge spike, and then on Friday at about 1 o'clock you have another little spike. So, but this is the week. So Wednesday, basically, there's nothing going on Wednesdays, and it's when you walk by, it looks like a ghost town there. So moving forward from here, what we're planning on doing, and like I said, I'm hoping by the end of this week, or within the next 2 weeks, I want to be able to pull over the codes from CHCS and pull them into that database so we can look at the RVUs and look at the codes. And I can do that now for Madigan, but you can't use the tool that I've made at any other facility until I do that, and you won't be able to get the codes. One of the other things we've talked about, we haven't had the time to implement yet, is analyzing note quality, because we keep talking about note quality as being a benefit of a MAPS rollout, but we don't have any way of quantifying that. And so we've had some discussions about creating a scoring rubric, and so you can actually assign a score based on a simple scoring mechanism and give a score to a note. But we need to set up that scoring mechanism so we can actually score before and after. And then trying to pull in some of the ER data and creating a tool so we can analyze the ER data a little bit easier and see what patients are showing up in the ER that may have been better off going into an appointment at their primary care clinic. So again, combining everything together, your observations, your interviews, and your data, that'll lead to success, and that's what it's all about. So that's all I had. Any questions? And again, the tool that I've made, I've shared it with a couple of other MTFs. It's working fine there, and I'm planning on setting this up. They're actually, the way I have it set up now, I can share it with any of the CWAs at any of the MTFs, and I think it will work fine.
Okay, there was someone with a raised hand. We've given you the microphone if you'd like to ask your question. Michael D. Hart, did you have a question? If there's anyone else who would like to ask a question, please feel free to enter it into the chat box or raise your question and we'll pass the microphone.
Okay, so there was a question, what security keys are required to run the ad hocs, I'm assuming. I'm not exactly sure. Basically, you need to be able to do FileMan in CHCS, and then from FileMan, I just do print file entries, and then you run the ad hoc from there. And actually have, we've done a couple of DCO sessions over in Western Region that go through the whole process of importing the data and analyzing the data, and we typically have about 4 or 5 people on a DCO every Friday, and I go through some of the processes and I try to record them as we go. The tools right now I have available on the Western Region SharePoint, and I'm constantly updating the tools and trying to make them better, adding filters and new queries and all that. But the next batch that I'm working on is going to have the codes. It's going to be a big change from what I have right now.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Ryan?
And most of the questions are about how you can get the tools. So I will work with, I don't know if you can have access to the Western Region site if it's public. I believe it is. I'll send out the link to where I'm posting everything, and then you can get in there and check it out. And then I'll also send a link with the videos that we've done so far. So that probably answers most of the questions.
Ryan, this is really no pop. I noticed that there were a few questions in the chat box. I was just going to ask to see if you could, or have one of the hosts just read them off for the sake of the recording.
Arlene, it was difficult to hear you. Can you please restate your comment?
Sure. If you can hear me now, all I just wanted to comment was there was some comments made in the chat box, but for the sake of the recording, I didn't know, Sharon, if you could just read the question or read the comments that were in the chat box, just for the sake of the recording. Over.
Okay, thank you.
And just so you know, the chat box actually shows up in the recording.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and like I said, most of the questions were just how the two main questions were how can you get the tools, where are they, and what are the security keys that are required in CHCS. So, and I think I've answered those, and I'll try to get the information out regarding the tools and how you can get to them.
One further question for you, Ryan. If the users don't have these keys, is there any that you know of? Is there any restriction on getting them for them?
I've never had any problems getting keys. It's just a matter of asking whoever. It's probably some SAIC representative or whoever manages CHCS at their local site. They just request to have fileman privileges. The trickiest part, and each site is a little different, is the process of getting the results off of the CHCS spool server and onto their local computer. We use just a simple FTP process. Other sites might do it a little bit differently, but you have to have one line per appointment. It can't wrap, so you have to make sure that you're bringing the file over as is instead of doing a screen capture. But to get those keys, I don't think they're going to have any problem.
Okay, if there's no further